Hello and welcome. And to all viewers and subscribers, Happy New Year on this 1st of January 2024. So I hope all your chess ratings go up this new year. Today, in this lesson 21 of the Chess Beginner to Winner series, we'll talk about how space can win chess games. So I have two games for you here. I picked games that I played before in chess tournaments. So in this first game, it looks like I had 89.6% accuracy versus 81% by my opponent. They did have one blunder, and we each had one inaccuracy. They had one mistake, or sorry, I had one mistake and they had two, and then we each had I had one miss as well. But anyway, let's dive into this game and see how we can use space to win some chess games. All right, so with the analysis turned on, the game began. I had the white pieces and I played e4. They responded with d6. So this is the Pirc defense. And right away, we see a difference. White has more space in the center by pushing the pawn two squares forward versus black's d pawn, which only went one square forward. So when you have an advantage in space, it gives you extra room for your pieces to maneuver behind these pawns that you pushed forward. So we see black is more cramped here. Their dark squared bishop will be blocked in by this d6 pawn. And white just has more freedom, more room to maneuver with this extra space. So we continue on with d4. So white grabs even more space in the center here. And usually, if your opponent lets you put both of these pawns in the center like this, that's normally a good idea to just grab all this space. And these pawns control a lot of important central squares. So now my opponent just develops a knight attacking this e pawn. So I just respond by protecting the pawn, developing a knight at the same time. And now they play g6, getting ready to fianchetto their bishop, and then they'll be able to quickly castle. So I go ahead and just develop this bishop, and it says that's an excellent move, but it prefers bishop to e3 here. Although, I don't know, that bishop to e3 move, it would possibly invite the knight to attack it. So I just developed this here, and they develop their bishop, and then I grab more space here by pushing this f pawn forward, and the computer says that that is best. So once again, we look at the position. White has three pawns pushed two squares forward in the center here, just controlling a lot of extra space and controlling the center of the board. And black is pretty cramped. Now, one difference between the side that is cramped and the side that has more space is that black would like to trade off pieces. Because then he would have more room for the remaining pieces. They wouldn't be as cramped. Whereas white has plenty of extra space for his pieces, and he wants to avoid trades, because if you gain space by pushing all your pawns forward and then all the pieces behind them are traded off, that can leave gaps in your position that are harder to defend if most of your pieces have been traded off and your pawns are pushed up too far where they could possibly be attacked easier. So continuing on, we have this move here, bishop to g4, which the computer says is an inaccuracy. It looks like it prefers just developing the other knight here. And now we have the bishop attacking the queen. Now, the computer prefers either bishop to e2, moving another piece again. Here, I just block with the knight, and the computer even says that that is a mistake. But I figured, if the bishop captures, it would help develop my queen. And also, the computer recommends this queen to d2 move. But, I don't know. I didn't want to do that and block my bishop in. So I won't go into these computer lines, but basically I just develop another piece and block that attack by the bishop. So now they play the best move, just continuing development. Now they're attacking this pawn here. And so white has to watch out because the knight is pinned to the queen and cannot protect this pawn any longer. So here I just develop and protect the bishop protect the pawn on d4 with the bishop on e3. And so now the computer says that that is an inaccuracy, that instead I should have pinned their knight to their king here with this bishop here. So continuing on, they castle, and the computer says that is a mistake now. So now the game has jumped in white's favor. It would have been about even or very slightly in black's favor if e5 would have been played to just try and grab space in the center and fight these pawns that white has here, this very strong pawn formation. So I just play h3, which computer says is best, forcing this bishop to make a decision to either retreat and lose time or to attack, but that would let me recapture and develop my queen. So we have a capture, and the computer says that that is a great move, but it does allow me to recapture and develop my queen. And now, finally, e5 is played, and the computer says this is a great move. So here, black in this cramped position has to get some kind of counterplay, some attack going, and make a little bit of room for his cramped position. And he targets white's pawns in the center and tries to gain more space in the center. So now, after e5, I capture with this move my pawn on the side, my less valuable pawn, capturing towards the center. And usually that's a good idea. But in this position, the computer preferred capturing with the center pawn here instead. Let's see. I won't dig into that because I want to just keep moving along here. But I capture with the least valuable pawn towards the center, and that's still a good move. So my opponent recaptures. And now, instead of capturing again and allowing the knight to jump down here and fork my queen and bishop, and I would be left with an isolated pawn. My king is still in the center. Well, I keep the center closed, and I play d5, which is best. So now I'm gaining more space in the center, leaving black with this slightly cramped position, although he does have this pawn developed up here to e5. But white gains more space, attacking the knight. And so in this position, knight to b4 is played, and the computer doesn't like that. Instead, it prefers knight to d4, but at this point, either way, white would be ahead. But with this move, he is forcing me to give up my bishop, or else I would lose a pawn here with a fork. So that obviously is not a choice. because if the bishop moves, then the knight would capture the pawn, forking the king and the rook. So I'll end up having to give up my bishop here. Now the computer preferred knight to d4 instead, and we can take a quick look at that. Now my queen would be under attack. The computer recommends continuing with this, creating a battery, aiming at that knight, and then here just leaving the knight there and developing the rook here to line up on the c file and get ready to push the c pawn and try and knock out this advanced pawn here. And then the game might continue with castling. A knight moves to reposition. White would gain space by pushing to a4, and then d6 here. So this is what the computer recommends instead. But now if we go, and this would keep the game closer to even, but in the game we had this knight to b4. And so I continue with castling, and the computer doesn't like this. It says this is a miss, that better would have been bishop to c4, which we can take a look at that. So, or excuse me, bishop to c5. Now the computer says the best move would just be to go ahead and castle here, castle long. And then, you'd have your rook lined up here on the queen, in case black wants to push the c pawn and trade here in the middle. But if we look at, instead of castling long, the second best move, which is this, bishop to c5, forking the knight and the rook. But, of course, white can't really pick off one of these pieces immediately because of this move. Knight captures here with check, and then the best move would be queen captures, and now the rook is under attack but would have time to move to e8 here. So let's go back. So after knight to b4, attacking the bishop, well, next we castle, and the reason I castled this way is because now I have a nice battery here up this half open file, lining up here on the knight, and my plan is to get the bishop up here and put even more pressure on this knight. So my opponent knocks out my bishop pair with knight takes d3, which is best, and then I'm forced to recapture. So I have doubled pawns here, but I have more space in the center, and the center is kind of locked down. Now there's a threat building on this knight if I can get my bishop here to pin the knight. So it looks like the best move would be for this knight to retreat back to e8. And that is another reason that a space advantage can win chess games, is because in a cramped position, you can also be limited on your options on where your pieces can move. So here, the best move is for this knight to retreat back to e8. And not even to d7 here, but to e8, which, that would really cramp. I don't know, the position is just really cramped, and you're running out of good spaces for your pieces to move. So anyway, in the game, it continued with a6, which is a blunder. But I guess I can take a look at this, what the computer recommends. Knight to e8, and then white, it looks like the best move for white is g4, which would start to grab more space on the king side, and try and funnel your pieces in behind these pawns and go after the king. And another interesting thing in using space in chess is the direction that your pawns point that's usually the direction you want to send your pieces in, the direction that your center pawns point. Now this is a little confusing here because we have pawns pointing to the queen side, and then we have pawns pointing to the king side. But if this D pawn wasn't here and our pawns were just pointing in this direction, then usually we want to aim our pieces, kind of funnel in that direction. If this D pawn wasn't here, then I guess you could funnel your pieces over to the queen side. But with this half open file aiding in our attack on the king side, this will help us, as we'll see here in a second. So the opponent makes a blunder, failing to notice that his knight is in danger with this pin of bishop to g5, and the computer says that's a great move because now the knight can't move, and it only has 2 defenders and we have 3 attackers, so some material will be lost here. So queen to d6 is played to break that pin, but it doesn't matter. We just scoop up the knight, and now that's the best move. And my opponent, looks like h6 is what the computer recommends, but my opponent tries to get some kind of counterplay. He checks my king, so then I just block here, and it looks like if we go back, looks like there are a few options, either queen to f2, which was what we played, moving the king, or even bringing the rook up and getting ready to triple the rooks up on this f file. But I play here thinking I'm ahead in material. If there's a queen trade, that just helps me trade off more material, and I'll just be ahead with that extra knight here in the end game. So my opponent wisely refuses to trade more material, and he just moves the queen out of the way. So we continue trading down more material, getting rid of this important defender on the king side. So the king recaptures. We move the queen up, attacking with check. And now, after the king retreats, we just pick off a pawn in the center here. But it looks like, that's an excellent move, but it would have been better to just bring the rook up to f2 and protect here, protect this b pawn, and get ready to triple the heavy pieces on the f file, 2 rooks and a queen. So we have a capture by our opponent, although it looks like f5 was most recommended there. So that's kind of interesting that the computer says that would be a better move, which looks like it just opens the position up even more. So we just attack the queen. The queen moves, threatening this pawn here in the center. So we just capture, which is best. They capture, also the best move. We capture another pawn, best. And now they attack our queen. But we are just lining everything up here on the f7 pawn, if we can get our queen in on the game. But since the queen's under attack, we have to move. We just bring the queen up here. Now all the pieces are attacking here. And now, let's see here. And the computer actually recommended f4 as being best. So that's interesting. But, I didn't want to go into... Well, I guess the knight is still protected by this rook. So, that move is probably a little bit better. And it might give you the option to jump over here and attack from h6 at some point. But anyway, in the game, my opponent checks. We go ahead and just move into the corner, although the computer prefers king to h2. And so the game continues with black trying to rush up here to the defense of the king. But now we have captures. Instead of recapturing, black tries to counter and maybe put pressure on this knight. But we continue to trade down. It looks like d6 would have been a better move to just start pushing this past pawn. But in the game, I felt that I was already ahead, and if I just traded off the rest of the material, I would have this extra knight and these two pawns in the center. So capture, capture, which is best. We just recapture, also best, forcing the queen to capture there. And then we just trade the rest of the pieces down. And then here on move number 29, I just push this pawn forward, and the computer says that's best because now I have two passed pawns here in the center, and there's, with the help of this knight, there's just no way to stop these. And so my opponent resigned here. The game, and before I show how the computer said the game could end, it's interesting the game ended here with these pawns pushed far forward in the center, giving white more space. But, here's how the computer could have, or what the computer says the game could have continued with. So you just bring the knight up, and the pawns will just start moving here shortly. But the computer didn't even get into that. So yeah, the pawns will just start marching, and with the help of the knight, and if the king gets in the game, it's an easy win. All right, I'll play one more. I'll go through one more tournament game that I played, and this next game is probably a little more exciting. So hopefully you stick around for this one. Let's take a look here. All right, so another tournament game. I had the white pieces, and I'm playing Grisham, and I start out once again with e4. So they play c5. So now I have more space in the center. They have more space on the queen side. So we continue with developing the knight, and this is the Sicilian defense. I developed the knight here so I can push this pawn up to d4 and try and get both of my pawns in the center. And this c5 move will be able to knock out one of the central pawns for the less valuable pawn on the side. So this move is played to keep an eye on this e5 square. And also it lets the bishop develop. But by keeping an eye on e5, when this knight moves to f6, the white pawn will not be able to go to e5 and harass this knight. So we have d4 here, placing both pawns in the center, trying to grab space. So black plays the best move, knocking out one of those pawns. And now, instead of, usually in the opening, you don't want to move pieces more than once until you get everything developed. So here there's an exception. It's better to capture, well, the computer says it's better to capture with the queen. So who am I to argue with the computer? But the downside to capturing with the queen is that knight to c6 could be played to try and harass the queen, although the bishop could pin that knight. But in the game, we capture with the knight. So now black develops his knight and attacks our pawn. We defend it, and now they play g6. So we respond by developing our bishop here. And the reason we put the bishop here is we want to bring the queen up here to d2. And this is the dragon variation of the Sicilian, because these pawns are kind of shaped like a dragon, I guess, if you have a good imagination. So the reason to bring this bishop here to e3 is that we can bring the queen to d2 and create a battery, and move this bishop up here to h6 and try and exchange off this important dark squared bishop, which is a defender of the king side, and that'll create weaknesses around the king here. And also, by moving the queen up here, we can castle on the opposite side and then push our pawns forward to gain space on the king side and try and attack our opponent's king. So the game continues with developing here, fianchettoing the bishop, getting ready to castle. And now, next we have f3. The computer also recommends bishop to e2, but we play f3, which keeps the knight out of g4 here from harassing our bishop. And it also will allow us to push pawns forward. We can push this g pawn forward and it'll be protected. So the game continues with castling. The queen develops, creating this battery aimed at the king side. And now we have bishop to d7. And I should have showed you the review by the computer. So if I run the review, it looks like we had 90% accuracy in this game versus the opponent's 75. And I even had a brilliant move and two great moves. They had one great move, and they had a blunder here. So the rest of the game was pretty even. We both had two inaccuracies, two mistakes, and one miss. So if I go back to the analysis here, we were at queen to d2, creating this battery. And now bishop to d7 was played. But the computer says that instead, knight to c6 would have been a better move. So if we take a quick look at that, knight to c6, that would immediately attack this knight in the center, and white should ignore that and gain space for the coming attack against black's king side. And so it looks like after that, recommended is bishop to e6, which looks like a strange move, blocking in your pawn here, but that would probably entice you to capture this bishop and get rid of the bishop pair. And in doing so, black would be able to recapture towards the center and fortify his central pawns here by just adding another strong pawn in the middle and giving an open, half open file for the rook here as well, and target this backwards f pawn. And so the computer recommends to go ahead and capture and get rid of black's bishop pair, and then it would open up this line for the rook here after the knight moves away. Okay. Well, and one other benefit of this, it could allow the rook to move here if the bishop tries to jump up here and attack. But back to the game. So we had bishop to d7 played by the opponent, and that's a mistake. So we respond with bishop to c4, which is a miss. The computer says we should immediately gain more space by pushing this pawn and trying to just march up here towards the king side. So we could take a look at that. So g4 instead is recommended, and then after knight to c6, castling queen side. So this is what the computer recommends, which this is similar to what happened in the game here. So after we played bishop to c4, now knight to c6 is played, and the computer says that is a great move, putting pressure on this knight. And then there's also the threat of moving here with the knight to e5 in the center and attacking our bishop, or maybe even moving the knight to the edge, and if the bishop retreats, we could capture down here on b3. So in the game, I played a3 to leave an escape route for my bishop. And so rook to c8 is played, lining up on my bishop, and I don't want any surprises, so I retreat the bishop back to a2, which is the best move. And now we have, one interesting story. Now that I've moved this bishop here, I heard a story about a grandmaster who was asked in an interview. He had a choice, something similar to this, where he could have moved his bishop maybe to b3 or a2, and it might have been a different position, and he didn't have to worry about this knight attacking him if he went to b3. And the grandmaster, he said, and when he was asked this question, the interviewer probably thought there would be some deep meaning to his answer. But he said he just moved the bishop to a2, or to the edge of the board, because it was further away and more off to the side. And he thought, well, the further away that bishop was from his opponent's king, he thought that maybe his opponent would forget about that bishop. And sure enough, in the game, his opponent forgot that bishop was way over there on the side, and it came into play later in the game, allowing that grandmaster to win. So an interesting little story there about, if you don't know where to put your bishop, the further away it is off to the side, your opponent may forget about it there, and it could cause problems later. All right, so we retreat the bishop, and now we have a6, which will allow, well, one thing it does is keep all the knights out of b5 here, but it will allow a gain of space with b5 coming. So white will try and gain space on the king side. Black will try and gain space on the queen side, because normally white will castle here to the queen side, which happens here. So white goes ahead and castles, which is excellent. But now the computer wants h4, immediately grabbing space on the king side. So the game continues with b5. So another interesting thing when it comes to space, when you have opposite side castling, generally it's a race to push your pawns forward. And normally you don't want to push your pawns forward if you castle. If we both castled on the king side, then if you're pushing the pawns in front of your king, that can create weaknesses around your king. And normally you don't want to do that. But when you have opposite side castling like we have here, well, now you can go ahead and just throw those pawns forward, creating or performing what's called a pawn storm, where you just storm your pawns forward, attacking their king's position. So black throws his pawns forward on the queen side, gaining more space and trying to funnel his pieces in behind and attack. White will throw his pawns forward on the king side, storming black's position and aiming his pieces in behind these pawns as they move forward. So finally, we play this h4 move, but now it's a mistake. And it looks like this gives black the advantage. Knight capturing here first would have been better. So let's see. This is what's recommended, just capturing instead of pushing that h-pawn. And then the bishop would recapture. So something like this. And then at this point, the game would be about even, and then h4 is recommended. But in the game, we have h4, and we try and gain space on the king side here. And our opponent will respond with h5, trying to keep the amount of space in balance on the king side. But instead of h5, which we see here the computer says is a miss, and then the game jumps back to half a point in white's favor. Instead of playing that to keep the amount of space even on the king side, better would have been b4, grabbing more space on the queen side and attacking. Because now the knight is under attack. If we move our knight, well then, one possibility could be capture and then recapture, and we're left with an isolated pawn, and there's this open b file aimed right down here to where our king is. So that could be a problem. But if we capture here, then the computer says that after this recapture, the bishop would be under attack. And it looks like bishop to b1 is recommended. But, also the king moving over to help protect the bishop. So anyway, at this position, white's bishop would be under attack, and black would kind of gain momentum here, forcing white to be on the defensive. So, here are the options. Retreat the bishop to b1, where it's not really doing much but playing defense. King to b1, which, I don't know, that doesn't do too much either. It gets the king off the line of fire of this rook. So bishop to b3, which is probably what I would go with here. But we didn't have to go into that in the game because my opponent played h5, trying to keep the space equal on the king side. And now we continued with capturing here, which is best. So we knock out that knight. And then we don't have to worry about it moving forward with the pawns pushing forward. And then after recapture, well, now we have bishop to h6. The computer says that's an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to move the queen to f2, which I guess would keep black's queen from moving here to b6 and getting ready to funnel in behind the pawns. But we started with this plan of creating a battery here and trying to trade off this bishop. So I was just continuing, following through with my plan, and it says it's an inaccuracy, and now the game is even. So the game continues with a5, grabbing even more space on the queen side, getting ready to push this pawn. But the computer prefers queen to b6. So we continue on with queen to g5, and this is an inaccuracy. But I moved here to get ready to target this g6 pawn because the f pawn cannot recapture because the bishop down here is pinning that pawn to the king. I guess there's a possibility of the knight maybe moving here and attacking the queen, but then I could still just go ahead and pick this pawn off. But it says that instead of this, e5 would have been better. So interesting, e5. I mean, I guess we could take a look at that. So instead of moving the queen, e5 would lead to the knight being under attack. It looks like capturing is not good because then we just go ahead and move to g5 anyway with the queen, and then it's a discovered attack by the rook on the queen here. So that would be bad. But anyway, after e5, the computer recommends just retreating the knight. Then we capture, knight captures, and then we capture here in the center. So In the game, we played queen to g5, and now the game is slightly in black's favor. But they respond with b4, and you think, well, they're just pushing forward, gaining more space, starting an attack over here. But that is a mistake. And now the game jumped to plus 1.5 in white's favor. The best move here would have been e6, so we'll take a quick look at that. E6 to block the scope of the bishop here. And then, the game would continue with capture, king captures, and what does white do next? It looks like e5 once again, just attacking the knight. And, that looks dangerous. So e5, and then we have what? Knight just retreating, and the game would be about even. Okay, so back to the action. We jumped our queen up to g5. So we're trying to, get our pieces up here, start some attack on the king, because our opponent is using his space advantage on the queen side to get ready to throw his queen down here, start pushing forward. The rook is lined up here on our king. So they push forward. We go ahead and capture here. So, possibly my opponent forgot about that bishop down here lined up on his king. And then we have knight to e8 retreating because we have a mate threat here of the queen capturing the bishop. So now my opponent plays, let's see, or actually I play this. A takes b4, and that's a mistake. I should have just immediately knocked off this bishop here. So we could take a quick look at that. So the computer recommends bishop captures, knight captures, then rook to h3, getting ready to swing over here to g3 and threaten a mate. And then d5, blocking the scope of the bishop. And then this would be a good move here because you block the scope of this bishop, which is pinning this pawn, and now your queen is under attack. So you just drop the queen back, but now it's saying that's a mistake, that better would have been queen to h6 by quite a bit there. So this line was given by the computer. The computer recommended this right here. This kind of line. But either way, white would be ahead. So back to the ending of the game here. So if we go back a few moves, the queen jumped up here to g5. The opponent counterattacks on the queen side. So we pick off a pawn. We're threatening a mate in 1 on g7 with the bishop and queen. They retreat the knight to stop that mate. We pick off this pawn, which was a mistake. But they just capture here. Now they're attacking our knight. So now we pick off their bishop, thinking that, well, if they capture here, capture our knight, we can recapture with our bishop, with a discovered check on their king. So, of course, they pick off the bishop up here with their knight. And now our knight is under attack. But in the game, instead of worrying about that knight, we play rook to h3. And the computer awarded that 2 exclamation marks, a brilliant move. Because we are allowing our knight to remain under attack. and we're threatening this move here, rook to g3 and a mate on g7. So the game continued with this move blocking the path here of the bishop, but this is a blunder. So instead of that, it looks like d5 would have been a better move, which I believe we saw earlier. And then, the queen would move here, but now it's saying the queen could have moved to g5 as well. But we could continue on with something like this. They're lining up here. This is just what the computer came up with as a possibility. So something like this. But before I get too far off here, we go back to rook to h3. And let's see, I guess we could take a look at what happens if they capture here. Well, then we have a mate in 3. We just go here. They would capture with check, and we do not want to capture that pawn. We could, it says then it's a mate in 6, but why allow some kind of counterattack? We would just move in behind the pawn like this, and now there's this mate in 1 and no way to stop that. So the game ended after rook to h3. This move here blocking the scope of the bishop. So the queen just moves to the side, a great move here in this position. And now we have f5, which is good, but the computer says the best option is to just capture with the queen, and give up the queen. And then, black would be losing anyway. So f5 was played. The rook moves over, lining up, threatening a mate in 1 again. And then here, my opponent played an inaccuracy, which leads to a mate in 5. Instead of that queen move, looks like he should have just played... we went too far ahead. Instead of bringing the queen up here to f6, rook to f7 would be the best move. And then the game could continue something like this. Capture, rook captures, bishop captures with check. The rook would block there. And so this is just one possibility that the computer gives here. And white would be winning here. Let's see, it recommends either capturing this pawn or just checking. Capturing the h-pawn and checking. All right, back to the end of the game. So f5 was played. My opponent was feeling the pressure. We line up, threatening a mate in 1. They defend with the queen, which is an inaccuracy. Now we capture here with check. And the queen cannot capture that bishop because we're threatening mate here by capturing the knight, and the queen is guarding there. So we go ahead after they block here with the rook, because they're just running out of options. So now we capture their queen, which is unprotected because the rook is pinned to the king. And then, now we have this, trying to guard the rook, but that leads to a mate here because this rook is pinned by the bishop. So a lot of tactics in the end there, but if we go back, we saw an interesting dynamic with the space being used in the game. So, in the beginning, we had white gaining space in the center, black gaining space on the queen side. And then white takes more space in the center, and by pushing one pawn forward, black is a little cramped here. But after capture, an attack. Now, if we look at this position, black is more cramped in his position, and white, because he's moved this pawn up further, has more space to maneuver in, and at the moment has a slight advantage. So we just continue developing, and after a few more moves, we see that black gains space on the queen side using the pawn storm by throwing these pawns forward towards your opponent's king. And so white counterattacks by gaining space on the king side here. And so now black attempts to stop any further gain of space by white by taking his own amount of space and keeping it equal here on the king side. But in this position, that is a missed opportunity. Better would have been to just press forward with the pawn storm and start attacking on the queen side there. So after an exchange of some pieces here, black gains more space. And we see both sides attacking, and it's a race on who can break through on the opposite sides here. So I don't know. I hope this helps you to understand a little bit how space can be used in chess to win chess games. So, white had more space in the center, which allowed his pieces to maneuver through the board and head over to the king side. And even though space was about equal in the king side, white had more space in the center, allowing his pieces to move through the center over to the king side and get his attack going with more intensity than this slower attack over here, where black tried to push his pawns, gaining space on the queen side, and get an attack going over there. So, I don't know, an interesting game. So just remember, when you gain extra space, that will give you an advantage in wherever that space is, whether it's in the center, on the queen side, or the king side. The extra space gives your pieces more room to maneuver. Also, your pawns in the center, whatever direction they are pointing, I didn't really get into that as much in these two games. But if you have like a locked position, here, let me throw up something new here on the board. Let's say we have a game that starts like this, the French defense. And then if they go here and we push forward, now we see these central pawns are locked. White has more space in the center. And this is a great opening that helps you learn about using space to your advantage. White has space in the middle more than black because of this advanced e5 pawn. But now the best move for black is to push this pawn right here. Now, the reason this is if we look at this chain of pawns here, the weak link is usually this bottom pawn at the base of the chain. And the center pawns are pointing down here towards the queen side. So that's usually good to push your next pawn and gain more space on the queen side. Where white at some point might want to play f4 and try and push forward on the king side and gain more space. And so the computer recommends possibly c3, and then we'll just play the best moves out here. Knight to c6, adding more pressure. Well, now it looks like knight to f3, helping defend. And so white, didn't have the time really to throw that F pawn forward right away because now it's blocked. So the game might continue with development. And then now the computer, this is interesting, is recommending that move. And then, let's see, finally, either the knight move or a capture here. And then we would have another capture. And then, let's see, queen to b6, putting more pressure on this pawn here. And now bishop to e2 to get ready to castle. Bishop to d7. So I'll just play out the best moves. Queen to c2 to help fortify this base pawn in the chain here, which has no pawn to protect it. And we see a difference. This pawn is protecting the e pawn here. So anyway, the best moves would be rook to c8, gaining space, or not gaining space, excuse me, placing the rook on the open file here. And then, let's see, castling, knight to f5, advancing forward, because this position is kind of cramped. Now rook to b1, lining up on the queen, a5, gathering space. Now bishop to f4, just developing the bishop. And now h6, maybe getting ready to kick the bishop. And so now g4, gaining space. So that's an interesting move. Knight retreats, bishop to d3, and then h5. Oh, excuse me, h5 by black. And now g5, gaining even more space. g6 to slow down any more forward momentum by that pawn. Queen to d2, connecting the rooks. Bishop to g7. King to g2. Queen to a7. So anyway, this is just an idea of how things can go. Lining up on the queen here, and now castling. And now recommended is b3, maybe slowing down any forward momentum over here. So you get the idea here. These pawns are pointed towards the king side, so you can funnel in behind them. Black may want to push forward on the queen side at some point, as his pawns are aimed that way and he has more room over here. And both sides will try and use their space advantages, to get an attack going. So white might try and start attacking over here, if that's possible. Black will try and attack over here. All right, anyway, before the video drags on forever here, just remember, if you can gain space in a certain area of the chessboard, that will give you an advantage, because it gives your pieces more room to maneuver. So remember, in your games, try and use space to your advantage. If you're in a cramped position, you can trade off pieces to give your remaining pieces more room to maneuver. If you have more space, try to avoid trading too many pieces, because then you might have these pawns far advanced, and the more pieces that are traded off, it'll be harder to defend those pawns. And there might be more gaps in your position that the enemy could slip through and start targeting your king. So I hope you enjoyed this video on how to win games using space in chess, and hopefully that helps you play and keep space in mind a little bit more when you're playing. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions or any requests for material you would like to see in the future. Thank you for watching, everyone, and have a happy new year. and a Super Chess Day.